name's Devin Moreno and welcome to the Baltimore Investors channel. And today I wanted to go into a little bit of the eviction process in Baltimore City. If you're a landlord in Baltimore City, this is inevitably something you're probably going to come up against. Unfortunately, the eviction rate is pretty high in Baltimore City. There are a lot of tenants who have really low credit scores, have really bad credit payment histories, have a lot of bad eviction histories. And unfortunately, there's a lot of reasons for this, but also a lot of barriers that can make this really difficult to deal with as a landlord. This is one of the harder parts about landlording in Baltimore City, but we got to go through it. Now, the first thing that you might have a problem with is the emotional weight of evicting someone. You are putting someone on the street after all. And a lot of times this will mean their families, this will mean the kids, this can mean a lot of different factors as far as putting them on the street. So of course, evicting a tenant should be used as a more last resort if there are other more creative ways to get the rent from the tenant. Maybe even altering the payments, going into bi-monthly payments, or somehow working with them. A lot of times, the eviction process can be mitigated if simply financial education or some sort of financial strategy is taught to the tenant. But in a lot of cases, there are, should we say, professional tenants and also tenants whom simply just aren't going to pay you for whatever their reason is. They're going to justify this in a lot of different ways. And those are the tenants we have to put out. Because the problem is, every single house that does this to you means you're paying that mortgage, and every mortgage you collect means you probably won't be able to pay it yourself, which means you'll be the next one out on the street. So you're not going to be able to pay those mortgages, your business is going to collapse, and you might find yourself in one hell of a bind. So unfortunately, this might be a situation of it's either you or them. And you're going to have to get that realized in order to get into this business. The thing about evicting in Baltimore City is it's a lot different than evicting in other parts of the country. The entire eviction system is almost in a sense rigged against you in order to keep the tenant in your house. In fact, this even applies to squatters and a lot of people who are going in your house illegally. Just simply breaking into your house and setting up shop in there can mean you need to go through the eviction process. And the eviction process will take you months and sometimes even half a year in many cases. If you're dealing with a professional tenant, then they can drag you out as far as even 9 months to a year. So you really need to know what you're doing. So I'm going to show you a lot of the process and also how to deal with some of the tricks that professional tenants try. And if you guys don't know what I mean by professional tenant, that is a tenant who basically specializes in jumping from house to house and not paying rent. They use these systems that Baltimore City put in place in order to live in your house rent-free for months at a time before you eventually kick them out. By then, your property is completely destroyed and it will cost you thousands in order to fix it. And they're off moving toward their next victim. This is something that they don't mind doing. Their lifestyle is already accustomed to bouncing around from place to place and being completely unstable. So definitely don't underestimate tenants during your tenant screening process. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. Now, before we get to the eviction process at all, one thing you're going to make sure you need is your rental license. Baltimore City requires you to have a rental license for every single one of your rental properties. If you do not have this, plus your lead inspection certification if necessary, then you can't evict them at all. I'm not even kidding. You actually are forced to allow the person to live rent-free if you do not have this rental license. And keep in mind, this can be looked up. Tenants can find out if you have actually gotten this license and kept it up to date. So make sure to keep that up to date, because if they're a professional tenant, they're going to know, and they're going to know you can't do anything about them, and you're just going to have to let them live on your property. Now, unfortunately, the first thing you have to do if you notice the rent hasn't been paid is to wait 5 days. You may notice that a grace period is not actually mandatory in the state of Maryland, but Baltimore City judges and courts actually honor it. So regardless of whether it's actually in your lease agreement, you might find it part of the due process to have to wait the 5 days anyway. This can already be a frustrating process. You're waiting 5 days for you to be paid. Sometimes this can be absolutely legitimate, so you might find your rent to be paid on time. I found a lot of my tenants do pay within that 5-day period, so occasionally it can be worth it to wait. After the 5th day, you can go ahead and schedule for an eviction. And this I recommend doing immediately. What you do is you file the failure to pay rent notice with the rent courts. You can do this through my personal favorite. These are these rent agents. This is not a rent lawyer. You don't want lawyers, too expensive, but an agent. The one I use is called Click Notices. And essentially, they will go ahead and file the failure to pay rent for you, of course, for a fee. So in my case, it's about $105. They'll file it for you, and then this is where you are officially saying to the courts, hey, my tenant has not paid rent for this month. Now, after that, the courts are going to take about 2 to 3 weeks to process your failure to pay rent and give you a court date. Now, that entire 2 to 3 week process is from the time you did the failure to pay rent to the actual court date itself. So you'll bid it probably about a week out, you'll get the court date, and then after that, they show up. Now, this part of the process is actually fairly easy, and it's probably the only part of the process that works better in the favor of the landlord. It's really as simple as, did you pay rent? And if the answer is no, they're automatically found guilty, and essentially you win the case. It's actually a very fast process. The only thing a tenant can often do to get out of this is to file the rent in escrow, which we're not going to get into in this video, but it is an easy defense for the tenant. But let's say in this case, the tenant does not do that, or maybe in more likely cases, doesn't even show up. That means the judgment is passed in your favor and you are allowed to take possession of the property. However, you have to wait another 5 days. So before you can actually do anything after getting a judgment in your favor, you must wait 5 days in order for you to even move forward to the next part, which is the writ of possession. This is to give the tenant a chance to pay you, even though they've already had about 3 weeks to pay you. So you have to wait yet another week because, of course, the courts aren't open on weekends. So you're now on practically week 4 in this process, and you are just getting the right to claim the property back in your name. So now we have the writ of possession. You're going to go ahead and file for that, and then that process takes about 2 weeks, and then you will have your writ of possession. So you might find that already strange. Wait a minute, did I not already just get a granted in my favor, like court case? Yes, all you had was a court case that said the tenant did not pay rent. And they didn't, and they found them guilty. But that doesn't mean you can have your property back. You now need to file to have your property back in your name. And that's another 2 weeks out from that point. So then you get your writ of possession, and then officially you can have your property back. Maybe. Because then you have to actually schedule the sheriff. Now, the problem with the sheriffs is that they are about a month behind in Baltimore City. This is actually a very commonly known problem, and in fact, it's going to get only worse. As of 2020, the sheriffs are actually going to be pulled in more numbers into the district courts. This is as of a breaking story in the Baltimore Sun that you can read up about. What that means is less sheriffs to do evictions. So you're probably going to be a month and a half, maybe even 2 months out before the sheriff will actually come and grant your eviction for you and kick the tenant out. But you still got to follow some processes though, so we're not entirely done yet. So let's say that the sheriff is only 1 month away and you got real lucky and you got yours, you scheduled date, and remember you need the writ of possession in order to actually do this. They'll give you a date and a time and they'll tell you to be at the property at that time. Now, at this point, professional tenants have learned quite a number of ways to make this process postpone or, push back even further. And these are some methods that I'm going to tell you in order for you to stop that from being postponed. So one of the first things you're going to do is go ahead and get a certificate of mailing to mail off a letter to the tenant telling them the eviction date once you actually received it. In my case, my company Click Notices will actually tell me what this is, and they'll give me the letter, and I mail it with all of their instructions. But you can call the rent courts, and they can walk you through that entire process if you don't have a rent agent for you. So you're going to mail this letter to the tenant 2 weeks ahead of the eviction date, which means the sheriff will never actually commit to coming less than 2 weeks because they have to give you the time to actually mail this letter. Now remember, the certificate of mailing is not a certified letter. Do not do certified mailing. It is a certificate of mailing. It's totally different. What they're going to do is give you a piece of paper probably a little bit bigger than a business card, just large enough to not be able to fit in your wallet probably. And that piece of paper is going to be stamped. You can't duplicate this, they won't give you an extra copy, and there is nothing you can do to get another one unless you mail a second one of these things, in which case you can jeopardize this even further. And if you lose that little piece of paper larger than your wallet, then you must start this process all over again, because the sheriff will not evict the tenant unless you can provide proof of that. So I would keep that in a safe place, but don't worry, you only have about a month to lose it. So the next thing you're going to need to do is post a letter on the tenant's door. This is going to be the exact same letter that you sent them using the certificate of mailing, but you're going to do this more than 7 days out from the actual eviction date. So you're just going to tape it on their door or whatever, and then you're going to take a picture of it. And you just need to make sure to get several pictures. Sometimes I would recommend communicating this with the tenant, texting them that picture so that way you have a date and timestamp that you actually did it. Because of course the tenant's going to remove this piece of paper. So you need proof that you actually did post it 7 days in advance. Technically, there's nothing preventing the tenant from lying to the sheriff, but most of the time the sheriff should honor the timestamp in your photo. Now keep in mind regarding this thing that whatever address is actually printed on this letter is what you must have to the T on your address of your property. That means if you have a duplex and the letter says apartment B, and apartment B is not clearly identified, then you must make sure it is clearly identified on your property. That means that their door must have a letter B on it or something very obvious. If that letter B or number 2 or whatever it is that apartment is not clearly labeled, the sheriff will walk away and your eviction will be canceled, and then you need to start all over again. So now we go ahead into the actual eviction date. You're going to go ahead and show up about 30 minutes early for your eviction. Now the reason why is because you're going to need to bring a couple of things with you. Number one is you're going to bring some spare letters for your address in your property. See, earlier I just mentioned that you need the apartment clearly labeled. Well, if the tenant removes that letter B, then your eviction will be canceled and started all over again, even if there's evidence that the B was once there. Also, the same goes for the numbers of your property. Let's say your property has a 123 Main Street. If 123 Main Street is not clearly identified on your property, that 123 portion, then the sheriff will leave and your eviction is canceled. Professional tenants can often get away with this by simply removing the letter, and you will have to somehow have that letter returned before the sheriff actually shows up. So I would recommend bringing spare numbers or letters of whatever your property address was. The other thing that you're going to want to have is a locksmith and a contractor with you. See, the problem with this entire process is the sheriff will only walk through the front door. They will not go through any other door of the property, nor will they go through windows. Even though it is your property and you have a writ of possession on it, you can't go through any other door either. So let's say your tenant bars the door shut or changes the locks on you. Well, you must get in through the front door. You cannot do so through any other means, even though it's your property. So you need to bring a locksmith and a contractor who can do whatever it takes to get through that front door. This can mean picking the lock, drilling through it, sawing the door in half, breaking it down in some cases, whatever it takes to actually get through the front door. The sheriff will note that there was barriered in some way, and your contractor's efforts to remove the front door will be noted as pretty much honored for the most part. So this is something to absolutely bring with you. If you have a contractor who can also double as a locksmith, that would actually be preferred. Now, once you get through the front door, you will have the final reward of all of your hard work, which is the sheriff will escort out the tenant. In this case, you might also want a crew to come with you in order to haul out the tenant's items. See, the thing is that at that point, you really want to get all their stuff out of there, and you want to make sure they can't get back in. If that tenant somehow gets back in the property, especially with their stuff in there, then they are now considered legal tenants again, and you must go through the eviction process all over again. So really make sure that you have some way to not only bar them from getting in, but also change the locks and barricade it up if needed, say you have a professional tenant, because if they get back in, it will be a nightmare and a headache for you, and you must do everything all over again. This can be an absolute pain in the butt. Another thing you want to bring, just so you're aware, is that certificate of mailing that I mentioned. You want to have that so when the sheriff needs it, he's probably going to want to look at it. you have it to present to him, and you do want the original. Once again, you cannot make copies. It was stamped, it has raised lettering, it's going to feel obvious. Now, of course, don't show the sheriff anything unless he actually asks for it, but if he also asks, you can show him your phone with the pictures that you took of the letter you posted on the door. And that's pretty much it for the eviction process. After that, you'll be about 2 to 3 months, possibly even 4, into this, and then, of course, you have the renovation process where you have to haul all that stuff out, fix everything that the tenants destroyed, replace the appliances that they likely stole, and then after thousands of dollars and thousands of dollars and months of time that you've actually been waiting for rent, because obviously opportunity cost is a thing here, you then can start re-renting your property. So obviously, it's important to make sure your screening process is on point, because putting in a bad tenant is worse than having no tenant at all for months. There are a couple other things to note about the process before I exit with this video, is that there are some things that can cancel this entire eviction process automatically, and that is one, rainy weather. They will not evict the tenant if it's even a sprinkle outside, so your entire process will be postponed. Now, it might be thought that you're just going to postpone to the next day, but no, there were evictions posted the next day. And as I mentioned, the sheriff's office is horribly behind. So you're probably going to get scheduled another 2-3 weeks out, if not a month, from the date because of that drizzle. Another thing about this is that snow. They will not evict the tenant, yes, if there's snow outside, but also if the weather is below 32 degrees. So in that case, you might find that a lot of tenants stop paying rent right around November. So, I mean, if the timing's not obvious, yes, that's going to be a serious problem. You're just going to pretty much pray for good weather at the time of your eviction. Otherwise, they can move it back. So this is something that professional tenants tend to do. There are no ways around that. Unfortunately, only the weather can handle that problem for you. So anyway, guys, that is it. That is the entire eviction process from start to finish. As you can see, there are a lot of ways you can get around some of the things professional tenants will do. Just make sure to stay actually accurate with everything that you're trying. There are many other things that I have not outlined in this video. These are actually just the basics, but you can see the Baltimore City eviction process can be very problematic. Well, you may ask yourself, how do I avoid these professional tenants who can use in this process and abuse it? Unfortunately, eviction court cases are actually kept off of Maryland Judiciary Case Search, so it actually creates a little bit of a problem because you can never see a successful eviction in any court docket at all. The only way to actually know if someone may have gotten evicted is if a property management company is suing them. So I actually advise you do the same. Just to put it on their civil case record is to sue the tenant after you have evicted them. You're not going to get any money from this process. Unfortunately, if you sue someone who doesn't have any money, then the garnishments will mean nothing and you will receive absolutely nothing. But more importantly, is you've created a court case against them so that other landlords can see that and be a little bit worried. So if you see anyone being sued, especially by a property management company for anything of non-payment of rent, I'd highly advise being cautious about that, if not renting to them at all. It should be a major red flag. They're always going to have reasonings for this. They're probably going to say that they were the ones who were scammed. They're going to say whatever they can, but just keep in mind, that's your only clue. Otherwise, it's up to you. Alright everyone, so that is it for this video. Hope you all enjoyed that. Let me know in the comments section below if you have any questions about the eviction process or even the escrow process, which I have gone through and I can talk to you about. And make sure to like this video if you like videos like this. I'm definitely trying my best to release a lot of educational content for you, especially you Baltimore City investors. And I will talk to you all really soon.